Yo, goons. What's good? Today, I thought we could just do something kind of fun. A little bit of CEOTaku 2023 bracket predictions. So brackets have been published. I think today, as of the 19th, about to be the 20th local time. The bracket has been mostly finalized, and so we know what the projections look like and the rough structure of bracket. First, let's take a look at the notable players. These are going to be all the big name people attending this tournament. And of them, maybe we can see a few standouts. Well, to start, I think that one thing that's going to be interesting about this tournament, of course, it is going to be the first big tournament at least, that is on the new patch on Season 3. And B, a lot of known players have been experimenting with new characters. And of course, the meta was shaken up dramatically. So I think that's going to come into play. For example, Leffen, who might not end up going, but hopefully goes. At the time of this recording, I think it's uncertain. Has been playing Asuka. And Zondo as well has been playing only Asuka since the patch. And of course, Jonathan Tene too. Zato nerfs, so Pep's on mostly Johnny. I wouldn't be surprised to see some Zato coming out. And Kazam also has a very strong Johnny. And Adventurer as well, also actually playing like only Sin, I think, since the patch. And Sin's actually very strong right now, in my opinion, so that should be something interesting to see. We're also, of course, swapped to Geo a little bit before the patch, too, so just goes to show there are lots of examples like that in this bracket. So of these players, trying to predict who's going to place the best depends on a number of factors. One, kind of my assessment of the meta, and whether I think my beliefs about characters are actually grounded in reality. And B, kind of like the players themselves, who are the likely culprits. Well, I think that above and beyond, the player that is most likely to win this bracket is absolutely Nubenheimer, which is kind of interesting because he won last year. I think the likely champion is the one to defend his own title. That's because since the patch, Nubenheimer has been very dominant. Of course, second place at EVO, famously extremely good player, and making Nago look very, very scary this version, using the changes to the fullest and almost looking like Nago got buffed to some extent. I mean, some of his hard matchups got better for sure, and although he received sort of a mini rework, Nubenheimer uses the new changes so effectively that it's hard to say whether or not the character got better or worse, and there's even an argument for better in that spirit. Now, of course, Varix also top 6th at EVO with Nago before the patch, and Varix is proven an extremely strong Agoriyugi player, easily up there with the best in the world, and I think in a bracket full of a lot of matchups that Nago doesn't mind too much, you might see Varix up there as well. I would expect a top 8 from this player depending on paths. And of course, you can never write out Tempest. Tempest is arguably the most consistent player in the West, and you can also make the argument that Tempest is the best player in the West for sure. I think there's a very good argument for that. If I had to pick one, I think that Tempest would be my most likely choice. But I mean, it's a shakeup. Short little tangent, but between like Leffen and Tempest and Nubenheimer and Slash, I think, are probably the ones that I would debate being the strongest players in the West, but it's very hard to actually choose. Anyway, I also think that Aaron DeMac is a very strong contender for this tournament, and that's because I don't actually think Leffen is going to be playing Chaos at this tournament. I think Leffen is going to be going mostly or all Asuka and hasn't really been playing Chaos that much. If he chooses to go Chaos, Leffen is also absolutely a top contender for the bracket. But Aaron is looking so strong since the patch. Been playing like only Chaos. Aaron, I think, is on a fundamental level easily one of the most skilled players in the world. So strong. And honestly, it's about time that this fella has a major title under their belt. Another player that's been a little bit underrated, I think, in this past season of competitive strive is Umisho. I'm glad Umisho managed to finally get back to some insane placements, getting top 6 at EVO, having a fantastic performance with the Soul. Umisho easily among the most skilled in the world and has an extremely, extremely strong Soul. I think in this bracket, Umisho has proven to be able to keep up or beat all of these players on this list in the past, and so naturally is a top contender. I think those are all the ones that really, really stick out to me as being the ones that are likely to take it. But to make some further predictions, let's take a look at the actual projected paths themselves. So Taku is pretty interesting because it actually only got 386 entrants, but based on that notable players list, the skill density in this bracket is extreme. For example, I top 8'd DreamHack San Diego like in April this year, and that I think had like 250 something, so I mean not too far off this tournament, but the amount of top players in attendance was probably like, God, a fifth of that list perhaps, maybe a fifth, I would say. Some of the same players, still a stacked bracket of course, but just the density is extreme. This is one of the most skill dense brackets we've ever seen, if not the most. So I figured we'd start in top 64, because I mean, pools, probably not a ton of potential points for upsets, especially because the way that these pools work, there's essentially like an upper pool and a lower pool within each pool. So what you'll see is if we look at a lot of these pools, there are a lot of strong players in the same pool, like Bean and Chaos, for example. But if you look at the pool itself, they're not actually set to collide in pools. There's like an upper and lower pool. They would collide in top 64, which is why we're going to start by looking at those. So let's take a look at this first top 64 pool to start things off. Now, I'll only really point out the notable sets here, things that I think might go differently, and also some interesting matches. The first one I want to talk about here is Bean versus Chaos. Chaos, an extremely criminally underrated and underknown player. That's because Chaos doesn't really play online that much under this tag and doesn't really enter tournaments much, but Chaos is an absolute monster. I know this player, I know the fellow personally. Very interesting, funny individual. I'll put it that way. But Chaos has a really wide array of characters that he can play, and he's extremely skilled at the game, and I think definitely has what it takes to potentially beat Bean. And so that could absolutely go differently than what is projected. Now, every set with Leffen at this level is also a little bit of a toss-up because we don't exactly know if Leffen's even going to be there, and if he is going to be there, if he's going to play all Osco or if he's going to play any Chaos. If he plays Chaos, it 100% goes as is projected. Not to say that Creator and MFCR don't have a chance, but I would be very surprised if it went any other way than that. MFCR Lord Knight could actually go either way. Lord Knight, also I think a very underrated player by a lot of people. Extremely skilled and has improved so much and can dance with the best. I mean, beat Gobo at that crew battle, that's worth something, right? And that matchup can definitely go Biken's way if the Biken has all the tech and counterplay. Big shoutouts to my boy Cheerio here of the NC scene, probably their strongest player. A goldless, one of the very finest, if not the finest goldless player. More ways than one. Could potentially upset Apology Man, but he has some good matchup experience with Alpha, a NorCal goldless, who's also a very strong player. Adventure is playing Sin, and Kazam could maybe be playing Johnny, so I have no idea how that could go, but I really believe Sin is a strong character. Likely, I think this would go as projected, but it's hard to say for sure. Apology Man is also a really consistent player. As for the winner's quarter of this bracket, becomes a little hard to say. Aaron versus Umisho, I think, could also go either way, but I'd give the edge to Aaron, actually. I think Aaron is maybe the top contender for this entire tournament. Aaron has proven that he has what it takes to win some of these tougher matchups. I think the best scenario for Aaron would be that the Nagos deal with Tempest, and Aaron deals with the Nagos. I think if Tempest and Aaron collide, it likely goes Tempest's way, but it's hard to say for absolute certain. I think in that scenario, based on, we'll see how the rest of the bracket goes, assuming Aaron takes Umisho's place in the upper bracket. It's hard to say, but I mean, Aaron pulling Umisho before top 24 is definitely one of the harder ones, I think, compared to who else you could have gotten. But this event is just so stacked. That one could go either way, and this could even be timeline defining. Like, the winner of this, depending on what comes next, could win the whole bracket. You also have Varix here versus Bean. That one is very hard to predict, and this could just as well be Chaos. I think Punk Varix is going to be a wash if Punk makes it that far. I mean, that's kind of funny. But I applaud Punk for entering, by the way. That's very awesome that he's still willing to do that and dip his toes into multiple games, even on long time scales. That's great stuff. I encourage more of that. Yeah, the rest of this, I think, is nothing too crazy. Down in losers, everything looks more or less correct. I think it's easier to project here. Now, BSG has famously caused many upsets, so never write that fella out. He might even make it further than this in winners. Also a potential cause for upsets for sure. Same with Vega. And same with Tense, honestly. All these players. You know, it just goes to show it's stacked. A lot of potential for upsets. But I think aside from that, when you get down to top 24, it's mostly going as projected. Moving on to the other side of bracket. Pretty tough pull for Hitachi here. Man, round 1, top 64 winners, and you get Marvello. That is definitely above average in terms of difficulty that you could have gotten. Historically, Hotashi and Marvello have gone super back and forth. That one's impossible to predict, and I really don't know how Season 3 changes affect that matchup in any sort of way. Nubenheimer Voltion is another chip player, also a homie. Shoutouts, but I think Nubenheimer probably has this. Nubenheimer probably makes it out on winner's side in this pool, the way it's seeded. Pep and Nima, likely going Pep's way. Zondo Snorlax. This could easily go Snorlax's way because even though Zondo is a fantastic, fundamentally one of the strongest players in the world, individual, Snorlax is an excellent Nago. One of the finest in NA, maybe the second or third best. I don't know how active Snorlax has been, so that's probably going to come into play as well with that one. But Zondo, I think, is pretty ahead of the other Oscars this patch, the people who picked him up after the patch dropped. I think that he's learned kind of faster and is also maybe fundamentally a little bit above like the other people who picked him up. Zondo just doing such a good job of learning that character, so maybe Zondo makes it really far in this bracket, who knows, but I don't think we're going to see the Ram. Either way, I think Zondo probably takes it over Pep as well, because Pep is on Johnny and nerfed Zondo, and both those characters are kind of like very mid, I'm not going to lie, and Asuka's just extremely strong, so Zondo looking good, pretty good path for him. Potential upsets here, Tene versus Jurassic Ori. Tene now on Asuka as well. Jurassic Ori is a very strong Leo player out of NA, if you don't know. And I think that the potential for an upset there is definitely pretty substantial. In fact, I would probably bet on Ori taking it by just a little bit. This could go either way, absolutely. Maybe Tene bodies Ori, who knows? But I think it's very reasonable that Ori wins that. Razo Flash. Flash, I don't even know if he plays this game anymore. And Razo on Geo. Geo, I think, is so strong. So, I think on this side of bracket, Razo makes it out on winner's side. And down here, Tempest gets a couple of tough tests to see if he's worthy to make it to top 24 winner's side. Having to go through Dawn, NA's finest player, into Super Noon or Nitro. Yeah, both not the easiest pulls, but not the hardest either. I think that Tempest is a good amount better than everyone on this lower end of bracket, and so should probably have it just as a function of skill levels. But in a tournament with top players like this, things can go anyway. I think if I'm a betting man, I'm making predictions. Tempest isn't messing up. He's on his game day. He's got his plan going and everything is correct. He comes out here. But this could go Noon's way as well, And again, I'm holding out that Geo is just extremely strong right now, so Nitro and Razo could potentially push it to the limit. Just as before, on loser's side, I think that probably things mostly go according to seed. Players that have strong potential for upsets down here, I think even who could have made it this far. A boy is quite a strong Potemkin player out of NA. Probably the best pot NA, because I don't think Shine and Snake Eyes play anymore. So I'm not quite aware of any other that are on a voice level. Big Booty Man, strong gold list player, could always cause some upsets. Red Eye I'm Not, also a strong gold list player and already has caused many upsets in the online scene over the past few weeks. And Luke as well, Luke SFL. That is Squidge Luke, if you don't know. Very strong Happy Chaos player. But a lot of these players, you haven't really seen them in offline as much as these top players. So it's kind of a wild card as to how well they'll be able to translate their online skill levels to offline. That's kind of the advantage these people who travel to a lot of majors have, I think. Or people who have more time to figure out how to control their nerves. I had really bad nerves when I went to Frosty Faustings. I got 65th, and I probably, with the path I was given, should have gotten I think there's a really good argument I could have gotten all the way up to 17th with my path, which would have been great, but I fell apart due to nerves, and I managed to get them under control, and I haven't really gotten nervous at all, I can say, at an offline since then. I haven't been in EVO Grands, obviously, but I've been playing against the best players in the world, EVO finalists, for example, at EVO in bracket, and I didn't have any issues with nerves, so it goes to show that if you have time to figure things out, come to understand yourself, you're much more likely to be at your best when you're at a big tournament like this, which is why I think a lot of these players, you could argue they're underseeded, or maybe things would go differently as seeded, but I think the further you get down in losers, the more these matches are likely to go the way they're seeded, except I'd probably put Snorlax above Anima, but that's the only one I'd really change down there. Now for the real juicy stuff. We've got Umisho Varix, Leffen Ed, Nubenheimer Zondo, and Tene Tempest. Tempest got a real nice path for this tournament. I'm not gonna lie, I think Tempest is cruising into top 8 winners, and then has his hardest challenge of the bracket right after that. But let's start at the top. We've got Umisho, and again, this could be Aaron as well, I think. Very reasonable. Versus Varix. Yeah, that one, in either the case of Aaron or Umisho, is really tough to predict. I think in the case of Umisho, Varix wins. In the case of Aaron, Aaron wins. That's probably how it would go if I had to guess. And then the winner of that is Bing Chilling. Absolutely Bing Chilling. To winners finals, most likely, because they face the winner of potentially Leffen. It's on Oscar, and is like to get upset by a player that is not on the level of these two. And Ed. And Ed is on a new character. Ed's a great player, but I don't think could beat Aaron, Varix, or Umisho at this point with Sin. It's possible, but I doubt it. Just to add a little more context to this set, let's again look at this previous pool on who else it could be. You could also see Apology Man or MFCR most likely are the ones to end up there. Now Apology Man could definitely take this. Could definitely take the winner of this too, potentially. Apology Man is also a very consistent player historically, getting high placements at tournaments and doing a good job of having a stable placement. In fact, is seeded to get 9th at this very tournament, even though going into losers before this. So I think we could actually see a timeline where it's Apology Man winners finals, depending on how this match and the ones before it go. Again, very contingent on what Leffen chooses to do. If he wants to win, if he wants to go Chaos, whatever. If he wants to go Chaos, probably we're seeing Leffen winners finals, but you never know. Down here in Nubenheimer, Zondo. That one's hard to say. I think because Zondo is so ahead of the other Oscars, Zondo actually has a good chance of making it really far in this tournament. But whether he'll defeat Nubenheimer is, I think, heavily dependent on Nubenheimer's adaptability in the matchup and experience with it. I don't know how much he's been playing the matchup. I actually don't think it's that much as far as I know. So the question is he just that much better with Nago that he can take it without as much experience as he might like, or is Zondo caught up to the point that he can make it work? I also don't know how the matchup goes. That could be Oscar favored for sure. I'm not sure though. And yeah, Tempest is Bing Chilling. Even the people who might have upset Tene, if we go back, being Razo or any of these other players, probably wouldn't take it over Tempest. So as compensation for having a hard top 64, Tempest gets a pretty easy top 24, I would say, and then makes it into top 8. Then the question becomes determining the rest of the top 8ers from losers. Now, based on the way it's seated here, I think that this being Umisho or Aaron, they probably make it all the way. The hardest challenge here is going to be Bean. Zondo being on Oscar, again, I think might not be ready for someone like Umisho or Aaron. You know, both characters that are, I think, maybe a lot harder to play against for Oscar than Nago, for example, above. And so I think Bean, Aaron, or Umisho is going to be the one to take this top 8 slot. But I mean, I'm ready to be blown away by Zondo. I'm a believer in that man. Extremely skilled player. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, if I had to pick a most likely one, it would be whoever is the loser between Umisho and Aaron in winners. Yeah, I think both Umisho and Aaron are going to top 8 this bracket, and both are top contenders to take the whole thing, in my opinion. So keep in mind, this player could very well be Ed over here instead of Apology Man or whoever from before. I think Apology Man kind of got done a little dirty with his winners seeding, but they still seeded him 9th, which I think is fine for him. But yeah, if it goes as seeded, this is going to be a tough one. Marvello is a tall order, especially that early in losers, and then straight into MFCR. Not easy at all. Not easy at all. But this could go very different based on being a player of a new character, of course. But yeah, if I had to pick someone from this path as is seeded, it's really, really hard. I think just because of matchup, I wouldn't end up betting on Apology Man. It would have to be the winner of MFCR and Marvello. And in that case, I think most likely go to MFCR. Hard to say. Very hard to say. Very hard to call this path in particular. Yeah, I think MFCR. Up here, it's basically a funnel into Varix winning and then Varix making top 8 if Varix loses this. Or if Umisho or Aaron, or whoever, like any of those players end up over here, doesn't really matter. I think this path ends up going the way of that player. The only one that I think could really upset it is Hotashi. The others I think just quite aren't on that level yet. Either that or they're new to characters, or there's some other kind of factor at play there. And finally, for our last top 8er, under this path, top of bracket, it's also a little hard to call, but I actually think that the most likely one is going to be Noon in this case. Yeah, Noon, of course, top 8ed combo breaker, and I've played against Noon recently. Very strong player. I think it's capable of doing it, but Razo could easily give Noon a run for his money, and again, Chaos. It's also possible. Easily possible. Ed Sin, I'm not sure if it's ready to make top 8 at this event yet. Might be the case. Who knows? I'm ready to be upset, but I think most likely this path goes the way of Razo and Noon. In fact, I'm gonna switch my choice over to Razo. Yeah, I'm doubling down on my Geo believer, my Geo hopium. Too much of a tall order for Nitro though, unfortunately. And finally, looking at the top 8 as is projected. As we already determined, I think the person on the upper side of winners semis is going to have a pretty easy path to winners finals. Not much to say there, whether it's Aaron or Umisho or Varix. One of them is going to end up in winners final. So I'm 95% sure on that one. And this is going to be a banger of a match, Nubenheimer versus Tempest. So a few things to say about this one that is a little interesting. So Tempest has been practicing an Axel just for anti-Nago, which I think is pretty smart, because Leo historically struggles against Nago, and more so, Tempest historically struggles against Nago, and you have two extremely strong, the two best Nago players, basically, at this tournament, Varix and Nubenheimer. You also have Test Your Luck and Snorlax. So, definitely this bracket crawling with Nagos. It's a good idea to have that Axel in the back pocket. He's been practicing, definitely a strong enough player to make it happen in a winning matchup. So we'll see if Tempest's practices pay off. Nubenheimer is from the region with the best Axels in the world, Stealthy and Trevor Sue, and knows the matchup to a T. Is so great at it. But is it too hard to overcome? That's what I think will be the deciding factor in this set. It's hard to call. I think most likely it goes the way of Nubenheimer though. Down to losers round 1. Of course, going back here, this could easily end up being someone other than Adventure, as we discussed, potentially Razo or Super Noon. Either way, I think Varix, if it is indeed Varix down here, is being chilling and makes it up to losers quarters without much of a struggle. Down here, Zondo or Tene, that should be interesting to see. This would be an Oscar mirror if it went as projected, and we'll finally get to see if Zondo is indeed ahead of the other newly swapped to Western Oscars. But yeah, I think Zondo advancing here is the likely outcome. But the real question is if it will be Zondo and Tene in the first place. Could be Apology Man, could be MFCR, could be Marvella, could be Bean or Aaron, or Umisho or Varix, depending on how that all goes earlier. I think that this match could be very different from what is projected. Zondo is a possibility. I think Tene, respectfully Tene, the probability of this happening is like next to 0, I think. That he makes it to all the way to top 8 at this event. The way that it's projected. It's just too hard, and he's a little too unused to the character, I would say, compared to the amount of just extreme talent at this tournament. Yeah. And so I think Aaron or Umisho or Varix, again, we have to consider those three kind of interchangeably just because of the uncertainty of how they're seated into one another earlier in the bracket. Whoever of that is down here, I think is going to be advancing. Yeah. And if up here we have Aaron instead of Umisho, I think the prophecy might come true that I was saying at the very beginning of this, which is the Nagos clearing Tempest, and then Aaron clearing the Nagos to take it home. That could be an outcome that we see. But yeah, down in the lower bracket, the way it's seated, we'll just restrict to that now that we're getting so deep into the bracket. We've got Tempest and Varix. That is a rematch, and we'll see if Tempest's practice pays off, if his Axel is ready to do it. I think maybe, but who knows. And then we've also got losers semis here. Yeah, that one I think is a little hard to call. But Tempest is 3rd seed, Nubenheimer 2nd seed here, which is pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, I think this one is probably going to go the way of the winner's finalist champion, which is kind of not exactly a hot take for a prediction. That tends to be the most favored player to win a tournament. But yeah, in this case in particular, I think it's just really... like it ends up being quite well shaped for that player to take it. whether it be Nubenheimer or Aaron or Umisho or Verix, all of them will be in a good position if they end up winning this winners finals and waiting in grands. But yeah, ultimately I think the champion is most likely to be Nubenheimer or Aaron, but it's very hard to predict. Or Tempest, actually. I'm going to put Tempest in that same tier. But yeah, that's a little bit of looking at the CEOTaku bracket. Should be really, really fun to watch. I'm looking forward to it for sure. And I'm cheering on the Gold Lewis Legion, man. I mean, even though I've been playing Johnny since the patch, I think that it's always fun to root for your homies, you know? And you like to see more representation. Because, I mean, it's the usual suspects here, except a lot of Asuka. Yep, that's going to do it for this one, goons. I've got some interesting content coming up, so please stick around for that. Goodbye.